you shouldn't use that because I really have gone and we're gonna talk about Agile Tester, Agile testing, and as you probably noticed, the title of presentation has changed a little bit. Come on, we are Agile after all, right? So we're gonna talk today about, or I will tell you a little bit about testing and the role of tester and the job of tester in iterations in the world of Agile and in the world of Scrum mostly. I was also thinking about Energizer, but I'm introvert myself, so I tried not to do this to other people. And but I will have a bad joke for you, but wait for it. Talking about Agile testing and the role of tester is a little bit challenging for me because we have only 40 minutes, and the last time I designed training for Agile testing, that was about 3 days, and we didn't have many exercises there. So probably it will be quite intense in terms of knowledge and the topics and new ideas that I will share with you. I'm a professional Scrum trainer, but what you need to know about me that I have IT background, and actually it started a little bit strange because it started for me from the programming path. I used to be programmer, then I became tester, which is kind of odd, but that was the path for me. And since then, I was really interested in testing and later in quality assurance, which you should know they are connected but two different things. And here we go with the bad joke, if the remote works. Oh. Get it? So when we talk about Agile, when we do Agile transformations with organizations, then usually what comes first, and we get fear of project managers who know that they will probably won't be needed or their job will change significantly. But quite often we forget that something should change also for the testers if you have them. So what are we going to talk about exactly? First, let's settle a common ground. Let's talk about what Agile is and why it influences testing and in which way. And testing, as you should know, is a context-based activity. So if you're doing testing in Agile world, if you're doing testing within an Agile method, that means that the way you do testing, the way you test software or other products, it should be aligned with that context, and that's very important. And I will talk about it from the perspective of transformation. Like we transform organization, and we get to the point that we should start thinking about changing the domain of testing. And then we see that we have multiple impediments in traditional organizations. And I will tell you about those impediments and how to solve them, how you can address them. And later on, finally, we will put everything together and you will see what would be exactly the role of tester within iteration or within a sprint in Scrum. So what to do and when to do it. So when we talk about Agile, of course, we should start from the Agile Manifesto. Okay, there's something wrong with my remote. Oh, here we go. Who have read the Agile Manifesto for Software Development? Okay, that's like 50-50, I would say. Okay, so it's good to read that. If anybody tells you that, okay, we're going to do the thing called Agile, then that would be the first starting point where we should look and try to figure out, okay, what is Agile about really, and how does it influence your work? But what is Agile really about? What is the value of Agile? Why we go Agile? So it's about the customer and satisfying the customer early by continuous delivery of valuable products. So products who have value for customer. How do you know if a product has value for customer? Actually, you need to test it with customer. You need to check with the customer, right? But to be able to do that, you need to have stable product. So that's already one point to keep in mind. And what is usually missed with Agile transformation is the point that you should not focus on doing Agile. Like people usually go for implementing Scrum. And organization think that, okay, when we have Scrum, then we are Agile. That's good enough. It's not about that. It's about being able to respond to changes, being able to adapt quickly to environment, being able to change the direction, which of course influences also how you think about your software and mostly about software requirements. The software requirements probably will change on the way. Oh, I skip one. So Agile is mostly about mindset, how you think about your organization, how you think about doing your job. It's described by 4 values, 12 principles, but there are multiple practices that you should choose from, I would say. You don't have to implement all of them, but you need to know that there are multiple practices, good practices, that may or may not work in your context. So you need to choose from them, choose wisely what fits your context and what fits also Agile testing. And here are some reasons for adopting Agile. And looking at that slide, which is taken from State of Agile report, every year there is a report like that published. What would be the most interesting reason for a tester, actually? Which one is that? That will be probably the 5th one, right? The software quality, enhanced software quality. So in a way, we believe that Agile is a good way to increase the software quality. And actually, that was the way it started for me. Because I started as a tester, even without training. I became a software tester. Then they sent me for ISTQB training. Then I learned what testing is really about. I learned some tools, I learned some new vocabulary, and so on. And then in 2006, and actually it was at Nokia Networks, I was introduced into the idea of doing Scrum. The way of doing introduction was, I would say it would be funny if that wouldn't be true. We got the book, and they said, okay, read the book, and from next week, we're going to do Scrum. And I still see that way of doing transformations in organizations this year, even we have 2018, and still people believe that if you give a book to somebody, they can read the book, then all of a sudden they know how to do the job differently. But there was something interesting for me, because as a tester, I was struggling a lot at that time. I was struggling a lot with my limited influence to software quality. I really didn't like the idea that I'm kind of last in the food chain, and I get the software, I test the software, and I have some ideas, and I, of course, find bugs. That's normal, but I have also ideas about new features, about enhancements you could do to the software. And usually what people would say No, it's too late. We're going to ship it anyhow, right? I remember when I was testing mobile phones and the KPI was if we have 2,500 open bugs, we ship it. It's good enough quality. And all the ideas you would find in doing testing, in the testing phase, probably would be skipped because it's too late, we don't have that time, just do the test and off we go. So I really like the idea of Scrum and idea of the Agile movement that, well, I would have something to say about the ideas in requirements. I could maybe add some requirements, I could generate some ideas and really, really influence the shape of the product that I will test anyhow, but I will have already some influence really from start. Okay. So when we talk about Agile, mostly it will be in the context of Scrum. You can see that on the slide. If you ask people, okay, which Agile method are you using, then Scrum has the most market share, I would say. So sometimes during my talk now, I will mix Scrum and Agile, but what works in Scrum in general should work in any other Agile method. And Agile transformation also means you need to transform testing. Okay, what's different from testing point of view? Here are some ideas. First of all, you should focus on working software. What does it mean for tester? It means that finding bugs is not good enough. Finding bugs is okay, but we are focused on working software. That means that those bugs should be fixed as early as possible, and you should aim at having bug-free product, really. And scope and requirements will be changing. This is what Agile is about. Agile is about adapting to changes, and changes means that we need to change something in product, or in the way we build product, we get better ideas, and we want to introduce those ideas to the product, which means that new requirements are coming. And that's pretty normal. And we're going to have a lot of face-to-face collaboration. So we end all send it to test manager, then test manager sends it to project manager, then there's committee, and then we talk about it, and then we need to find the business analyst who wrote the requirements and wait for decision, and then maybe it will go to coding or something like that. Here, we're going to talk face-to-face with the business and with the programmers, with the developers doing the work. And there's no blaming game anymore. If we are about working software, that means that everybody in the team should focus on working software and having high-quality software at the end of iteration. So there cannot be a blame game. You cannot really say, if you really do Scrum and if you want to be Agile, you cannot say that the tester didn't do something. It doesn't work like that. The whole team failed in that respect, not a tester, right? And there is involvement from the beginning, but I talked about it already. And there is no handover of the software to testing. So there is no strict point on the timeline that says, okay, now you can test it. You can test it whenever you think there is something to test. And whenever you think that you can influence the quality of the system. And here we have beautiful definition from the book. The book is Agile Testing. And we have all of the things that I talk about now in one definition. So professional tester is tester who embraces the change, collaborates well with both technical and business people, understands the concept of using tests to document requirements and drive development. So from being at the end of the food chain, all of a sudden you are at the beginning and you can influence the whole flow, right? But there is one thing that I don't like about this definition, and I don't really agree with that definition fully. The one thing is that if you go for Scrum, there are 3 roles. There's product owner, development team, and Scrum Master, right? Where's tester? And then we say, hey, here we go, there is also Agile Tester, right? And then we try to plug those people in and say, oh, by the way, here's the tester. And he will be doing testing. And there's usually a lot of confusion with approach like that. Of course, Agile Tester should be part of development team. And being developer doesn't mean that you only do programming. That means that we have people with all the skills needed in the team doing the development. And if in those skills we need testing skills, and usually we do, then we should have people with that skill. But it can be different per team member. So there is the whole team approach. Everybody is responsible for testing, everybody is responsible for removing bugs from software, and everybody is responsible at the end for delivering working software. So the skill set would look like that we have people with multiple skills, but we need to stop thinking about people as somebody who has only one skill. Usually people have multiple skills. In some things, in doing some job, they are really good. In other, maybe less. But they should have that skill. And we can have still some team members skilled mostly in professional testing, but everybody should know a little bit about it. And that means that the role of tester will change also slightly to educating about testing, I would say. You need to talk to your team about testing, why testing is important, how would you do testing in a sprint, what do we need to test and when. That's also responsibility of professional tester if you want to be professional. But here are the impediments that you usually face in an organization transforming to Agile. What are the impediments? Well, first, nobody believes that we can do that. And usually we see quite a lot of resistance within testing teams, testing departments. Why? Because that means that we will need to do something with your department if we want to do really Agile and if we want to change the company to become Agile company and if we want to have Agile teams. And if we don't change anything in that organization, nothing will change. You will still have tests at the end. Tests will find bugs. Then we don't do much with the bugs because there's not much time and so on. Okay? Why is that? First idea is that usually in traditional organizations we have something called test silos. So we have a testing department or a group of testers. Somehow when people come to the door, somebody puts a sticker on their head and says, you are a tester. That's it. You can't do anything else. You will be just testing now. And we have also focused on finding bugs and proving that the software is really bad, the quality is really bad. And usually it goes like that on a project you have a tester. And when it comes to testing, then tester or even team of testers finds bugs and says, oh, this software is really bad and it shouldn't be shipped anywhere. It cannot go to production. Of course, then everybody is blaming testers as the bad guys because you are the guys giving the really bad message that nobody wants to hear now, right? And testing is undefined and it's not visible. It's like nobody thinks about testing. Everybody focuses on developing software. That means mostly programming, and then yeah, somebody needs to test it. And usually what we see also is like the test department knows that they need to test something, they make plan, they say, okay, we need 3 months to test it, and then of course the project is late, so we come to the test department and we say, yeah, but you have like 3 weeks. Test everything. You heard that before? Test everything, or just test the important stuff, right? And this effort is not visible anywhere, and it's seen as a kind of bottleneck at the end of the project. And if we try to do Agile in this organization, what we see usually is that what we get, usually we get mini waterfalls in iterations. That means that testing is still at the end, but it's in smaller time frame. We're going to explore that topic later on further slides. There's graphic for that, so you will see what's really wrong with that. And there is a lot of manual testing, and people still click in software and they repeat the same test over and over again. And we have old-fashioned process standards, procedures, and so on, and we try to fit them into the sprints. This won't work. When I see that a tester starts to preparing test plan and writes scenarios and build some libraries and things like that, and create this huge amount of documentation, I know that there is something wrong. The focus of that work went somewhere else than it should. And what we also see, we get late UAT, user acceptance testing. And we think we are ready, we think we have good software, and then there's somebody coming who needs to look at the software, and then they usually say, oh, it's still bad, you need to fix it. So how are we going to approach those impediments? What should we do to change the way we do testing? First of all, we should break the silos. We should give the testers from the testing department or testing teams, we should give them to the teams. But then usually we have two arguments with that. The arguments are coming usually from the testing department. First argument is, okay, who's going to coordinate them, and who's going to manage their work, and who's going to really make sure that what testers do is the right thing? Are they doing the testing according to our policy, and so on? And the other thing is that testing is seen as not independent. There is a whole big idea in ISTQB that software testing should be independent activity, and usually it's understood as keep testers away from developers. There is this idea that when tester will talk to developer, then they will become friends. That's strange. And then they will collaborate, and maybe testers won't test so well anymore because they like the guy, But if you're a professional, it shouldn't really happen, right? You care about your profession, so you will do the best effort still. And how to address this idea about coordination, about standards, and so on. Here's the example on the slide. It's called the Spotify model. And you don't need to implement the full Spotify model. That's not what I'm saying. But what you should do, you should build communities of practice instead of departments. And have some practice lead who will take care that the people will be educated, that the people will follow procedures and standards. As simple as that. But keep them in the teams. The teams building the product, right? And focus on getting to done. In Scrum, there's a big idea that at the end of the sprint, we should have done increment. What done means, it should be tested. It should be stable. It should be integrated with what we had before. That means that we should not have any regression there. And why it's so important? Because only this way you are really sure about your software quality. If every time you will focus to have that done increment in every sprint, in every iteration, then you can be sure that the total software quality is still okay. That's the only way. Come on. There's issue with remote again, but here we go. You know, usually things don't work well on testing conferences, right? And how can we make testing visible? You can make testing activities visible, right? You can put them on the wall where you have other tasks, and you should. Then the whole team sees that, okay, we need to do this much to get to done. And that means also doing the testing. You are not done until testing is not done there, right? So make it visible. Write it on sticky notes or make a column on that wall saying, okay, guys, before done, there's testing. It needs to be tested. And include testing in your estimation. What I see, and its pattern, or anti-pattern, you could say, anti-pattern that we see is that when teams estimate the size of items, they don't include testing. And then there's big surprise at the end of the sprint that, oh, we are not done. We couldn't finish that. Why? Oh, because of testers. Usually that's what they say, right? And then the testers need to stay late to fix it, right? That's the wrong approach. But if you would put that testing effort also in estimation, then everybody would see that some things are quite easy to develop, but are not that easy to test. There is one single change that could influence so many screens, so many flows, and this much work needs to be tested. So it's bigger than you thought. So testers should influence that. And we should think what testing needs to be done when. There's a nice model you could use. This model is nice enough and simple enough that you can use it with your product owner, with your team, to have that conversation about what testing is about and why we need to do those tests, really. Why it's necessary. And then you need to think, okay, when are we going to do that? And there will be some things that should land in your definition of done. This is just example. Don't take it as granted. But this is what usually lands in your definition of done. And there will be some tests that are too heavy, too expensive. You don't have access to environment and things like that. So don't put it in the definition of done. But then you still need to keep it visible. So just create product backlog item for that and put it there and say, before we ship, we need to do those items first, right? Like typically it's performance tests, security tests, and then non-functional, I would say, and sometimes it can be hardware integration test. If you are building something for a car or some kind of hardware, like heart monitoring piece or whatever, there can be a situation that you don't have access to that device every single sprint, or installing to that device and keeping the environment stable is quite big effort. So put it in the backlog so it's still visible for later. And don't do this. This is what I told you about already. This is called MINI-WATERFALL. This has nothing to do with being agile and doing agile. This is just waterfall, but in sprints. And it happens so many times. How many of you have seen that in practice already? Oh, too many. And I had that situation when management found out about this. And the situation was that the management heard that the testers stay always late, and actually they worked in a weekend. And why was that? Because the sprint review was on Monday morning. So what happens, the programmers move everything from the development column to test column, usually Thursday late, right? And they say, you still have Friday to test it. But don't screw it up. On Monday we have review, so, better make it stable. And they spend that weekend in the office, and the manager found out about it. And managers, what they usually do, they fix problems for you, even if you don't ask them. And what they've done, they changed the sprint schedule. So the review was at the end of, it was at the beginning of Thursday. The first day, morning, Thursday, was the sprint review. Guess what changed? Was there any change really? Yeah, the only change was that the testers stayed late overnight on Wednesday. That was the whole change they achieved. What's wrong with that is the focus of the team. Somehow the team sees testers as kind of separate guys, not part of the team, and they hand over the work. So start thinking from the very first day of your sprint, okay, what should we do to get something really, really done as quickly as possible? Get that first element done, then move to the next one, then move to the next one. That would be more agile than doing everything in one go. And that means that you would work in this way. Instead of waterfall, you would start working in parallel. Together with somebody doing the coding, you should start testing. It can be influencing automated tests even, right? And about independence of testing, how to achieve that, and how to work this way also, how to make testing more parallel to coding. That means that you should use test-first approach. So when you design test first, as the first thing you do in iteration, then you have the independence of testing because you are not influenced by the implementation, and then the programmers can produce better code, and then, of course, you can start testing early. Right? And then it's easy. And for that, you can use any acceptance test-driven development or specification by example. And with specification by example, there is also a nice side effect that actually you start documenting software by tests. Tests start describing what the software does. Right? And regression testing will kill you if you're doing that in manual way. There's no way to do agile testing without automation in sprints. This is what happens. The set of regression grows, so it needs to be automated really because you won't be able to do regression testing and new testing in the same sprint. And there's this model for that, the test pyramid. So you should have multiple tests on unit level and integration, then some tests on business layer, and then maybe some tests on the interface, on the user interface itself, right? And you can use XP practices for quality assurance to make sure that there will be less bugs produced. So there is less bugs to catch and less manual tests that you need to do. There will be still some manual tests that you need to do, like exploratory testing, which is good. But most of the stuff should be automated already in the process of development, right? Oh, and finally, how to test in sprint. So first, you need to establish your quality standard, which is described in definition of done. The next thing you do, what's not in definition of done is visible in product backlog. Those are the big, expensive tests that we need to do. And then when you have requirements, so you talk about details of requirements like user stories and so on, there are acceptance criteria, you should start writing tests for that. You can document the requirements or at least the acceptance criteria of user story in form of tests. That's the first thing. And then we go into the planning, and now you should ask the question, okay, how are we going to test it? What would be the scenario? Sometimes good question is also, okay, how are we going to demo it? What would be the flow that we want to show? That's a good starting point. And then add some tests to that. And then we put it in the sprint backlog. So you have the testing effort and test activities visible in the backlog. So you know that this job needs to be done also in the sprint. It needs to be visible. Then you talk about it at daily Scrum, and you focus, okay, are we doing testing? How are we doing testing? Are we done already? Is there something to test already? how many tests have we produced so far, what's automated so far, and so on. And on review, you can show the test report, usually automated, generated one, and the fun way to do demo is actually run the automated tests. It can be done this way. And of course, there is retrospective, and on retrospective, the input from professional tester is, okay, how are we going to improve quality? What can we do next sprint better so the quality of software is better? That's it. And then we have tested, done increment. Thank you. So there is only one final thought. Testing is team effort and team responsibility, and agile testing means more quality assurance than testing and doing the test activities. I leave you with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Krystian Kaczor.
Do we have time for questions?
The break is going to start not yet. Yes, we do have time for questions. So can I get the Slido screen, please? And we'll just run just one or two, just very briefly, please. Okay, this is the list. And the question is, how do we start the agile mindset in a team or company? It's often made by sharing an online quiz, watch video, etc.
It's a good one. Yeah, it's not that simple. What I would say is, okay, we talk now more about agile transformation than agile testing, of course. And agile transformation should start with some awareness for the management so they understand what is agile about and how it will influence the whole organization. And they need to understand that agile doesn't mean doing sprint on team level, right? That the whole organization needs to change, and maybe you need to start about building products. So you need to decide, okay, what products are you offering us as organization, and build teams around it, and then send people for training, for God's sake. It's not that expensive anyhow, right? And I don't get really the idea how you can expect people to work this way if they never ever attended a training. And then, okay, training is usually still not enough. Okay, you learn the theory, you learn some tools, maybe some practices, okay, but then you go back to work and you start thinking about, okay, how are we going to apply this on our specific context? And then what helps? Get agile coach, get somebody who done that before and can help you with that and can help you learn on the job. That would be the usual process of doing transformation to make it successful, right? Okay.
Thank you very much. Krzysztof, make sure that you show up for your gift. I don't suppose we've got more time for questions, so let's thank our speaker, Krystian Kaczor.